The desert is never truly silent. Long after the sun has disappeared beyond the western horizon, the sands of Egypt continue to whisper. The wind glides over ancient dunes, carrying grains that have witnessed 5,000 years of forgotten history. Beneath those shifting sands lie broken walls, abandoned tombs, shattered pottery, and names almost erased by time itself. Tonight, we begin not with the Great Pyramid, not with Tutankhamun, not with Ramses the Great, not even with Narmer, the king traditionally credited with uniting Egypt. Instead, we journey into a darker and far more mysterious age, a time before Egypt had a single crown, before hieroglyphs covered temple walls, and before pharaohs were worshipped as living gods. This is the world historians call Dynasty Zero. It is a modern name, created by archaeologists for rulers who lived before Egypt's first dynasty. These kings left no grand monuments announcing their victories, no colossal statues proclaiming their power, no royal biographies carved into limestone cliffs. Instead, they left only whispers, a scratched symbol on a clay jar, a seal pressed into wet mud, a broken ivory label buried beside a forgotten tomb. For centuries, no one even knew they had existed. When ancient Egyptian scribes recorded the names of their kings, these rulers were almost completely absent. Later, historians celebrated the great pharaohs who built pyramids, conquered empires, and raised magnificent temples along the Nile. But the men who came before them vanished from memory, as though history itself had chosen to forget them. Yet the desert remembers. Every excavation at Abydos reveals another clue. Every fragment of pottery, every seal impression, every weathered inscription tells us that Egypt's story began much earlier than anyone once imagined. And hidden within those fragile clues are three names that continue to puzzle archaeologists: Iry-Hor, Ka, and a shadowy figure known only by a mysterious symbol, crocodile. Were they truly kings? Did they rule all of Egypt? Or were they simply powerful chiefs whose reputations grew into legend over thousands of years? No one can answer with certainty. That uncertainty is what makes their story extraordinary. Imagine standing on the banks of the Nile more than 5,000 years ago. There are no pyramids rising from the desert, no colossal temples, no avenues lined with towering statues. Instead, scattered villages hug the fertile floodplain. Farmers work the dark soil left behind by the annual flood. Fishermen cast woven nets into the river's calm waters. Herds of cattle graze among green reeds, while crocodiles drift silently nearby, watching from the shallows. Each settlement belongs to its own local ruler. Each community worships its own sacred animal. Some follow the falcon, others honor the bull. Some fear and revere the crocodile. The Nile is both friend and enemy. It feeds the people with fertile land, yet it also hides deadly predators beneath its surface. In this world, survival depends on leadership, cooperation, and strength. Slowly, ambitious rulers begin expanding beyond their villages. Alliances form. Trade routes stretch farther along the river. Conflicts erupt over fertile farmland, precious resources, and control of the Nile itself. These struggles will eventually create one of history's greatest civilizations. But before Egypt can become a kingdom, someone must take the first step. Someone must imagine that many lands can become one. Somewhere in this forgotten age, the idea of kingship begins to change. No longer is a leader merely the strongest warrior in a village. He becomes something greater, a guardian chosen by the gods, a keeper of order, a symbol of unity. Perhaps that transformation began with rulers like Iry-Hor. Perhaps Ka pushed the dream even further. Or perhaps there were many forgotten kings whose names have disappeared forever beneath the sands. Even the mysterious crocodile may represent more than a single individual. Some Egyptologists believe the crocodile sign belonged to a regional ruler. Others argue it may have identified a powerful institution, a sacred cult, or an administrative authority rather than a king. The evidence remains incomplete, reminding us that archaeology often raises as many questions as it answers. That is the challenge of exploring the world's earliest history. Unlike later civilizations that filled libraries with written records, these rulers left only fragments: a chipped pot, a damaged seal, a faded symbol carved into ivory. From these tiny clues, archaeologists attempt to rebuild entire lives. Every new discovery has the power to rewrite history. A single inscription can move a king forward or backward in time. A newly discovered tomb can overturn decades of scholarly debate. History is not a finished book. It is a puzzle with thousands of missing pieces. Tonight, we follow those pieces into the heart of ancient Egypt. We will descend into royal tombs hidden beneath the desert. We will examine symbols carved before hieroglyphic writing reached its full form. We will meet kings whose existence was doubted for generations, and together we will search for the moment when scattered kingdoms along the Nile became the first united nation in human history. This is not merely the story of forgotten rulers. It is the story of how civilization itself was born. Because before the pyramids, before the golden masks, before the mighty pharaohs whose names echo across history, there were shadows. And sometimes the oldest shadows tell the greatest stories. Chapter 1. Egypt. Before Egypt. The story of ancient Egypt did not begin with a king. It did not begin with a pyramid rising above the desert, nor with a pharaoh wearing the double crown. Those symbols belonged to a civilization already mature, already confident in its identity. To understand the mysterious rulers who came before the pharaohs, we must travel back to a time when Egypt itself did not yet exist. More than 6,000 years ago, the land we now call the Sahara looked nothing like the endless sea of sand we know today. It was green. Vast grasslands stretched toward the horizon. Rivers and shallow lakes reflected the African sun. Acacia trees dotted the landscape, while elephants, giraffes, antelope, buffalo, and even hippopotamuses roamed freely. Crocodiles basked along the edges of freshwater pools, and hunters followed herds across open plains that today lie buried beneath dunes. Rock paintings discovered deep within the Sahara preserve echoes of this forgotten world. They show cattle, wild animals, boats, dancers, and families living in a landscape rich with life. These images remind us that one of Earth's greatest deserts was once a thriving homeland. But nature is never still. Around the 5th millennium BCE, the climate began to change. the rains became less reliable. The lakes slowly shrank. Grasslands turned dry. Year after year, the fertile landscape retreated. What had once been a paradise gradually transformed into an unforgiving wilderness. Entire communities faced a choice: stay or follow the water. Thousands of people migrated eastward, drawn toward a river unlike any other, the Nile, flowing more than 4,000 miles from the heart of Africa to the Mediterranean Sea. The Nile became a lifeline. Every year, its waters overflowed their banks, leaving behind rich black silt that transformed narrow strips of land into some of the most fertile farmland on earth. Ancient Egyptians would later call this fertile soil Kemet, meaning the black land. Beyond it stretched the red deserts that protected the river valley from invaders while also isolating its growing communities. The Nile offered something increasingly rare in the ancient world: predictability. While many rivers flooded without warning, the Nile followed a rhythm. The annual inundation nourished crops, filled irrigation channels, and sustained villages year after year. It became the heartbeat around which life was organized. Families built homes from mud brick gathered along the riverbanks. Fields of barley and emmer wheat spread across the floodplain. Goats, sheep, and cattle grazed on fresh vegetation after the floodwaters receded. Fishermen harvested tilapia and catfish from the river, while hunters pursued birds that gathered in the marshes. Life was difficult, but it was stable. As generations passed, small farming villages grew into prosperous communities. Each settlement developed its own traditions, its own sacred places, its own leaders, its own gods. Some villages honored the falcon soaring high above the desert. Others revered the powerful bull as a symbol of strength and fertility. Still others respected dangerous creatures like crocodiles, believing that the untamed forces of nature possessed divine power. In this early world, religion and daily life could not be separated. The river flooded because the sacred powers allowed it. The harvest succeeded because the spirits remained favorable. Leadership itself became intertwined with the divine. The strongest chief was expected not only to protect his people, but also to maintain harmony between humanity and the unseen world. This belief would later evolve into one of Egypt's greatest ideas, the concept that the ruler was responsible for preserving order throughout the universe. Long before the word pharaoh existed, its foundations were already taking shape. Yet these early communities were far from united. The Nile Valley was divided into many independent territories. Each possessed fertile land, fishing grounds, and access to important trade routes. Competition was inevitable. Neighboring settlements exchanged goods such as pottery, stone tools, woven textiles, ivory, shells, and precious minerals. Traders traveled remarkable distances, bringing obsidian from Ethiopia, cedar from the Levant, and exotic materials from Nubia to the south. Trade brought prosperity, but prosperity also attracted rivals. Control of river crossings became increasingly valuable. The richest farmland became fiercely contested. Access to trade routes meant wealth, influence, and survival. As populations increased, so did conflict. Archaeological discoveries reveal that some villages built defensive walls. Weapons became more sophisticated. Ceremonial maces and finely crafted knives appeared alongside practical tools. Some were functional, others served as symbols of authority. Power was no longer measured only by physical strength. It was displayed through craftsmanship, ceremony, and control over resources. Slowly, powerful leaders emerged. Some governed only a single settlement. Others extended their influence across neighboring villages through alliances, trade, marriage, or conquest. These ambitious rulers began creating something entirely new. Not simply larger villages, but regional kingdoms. Upper Egypt, stretching southward through the narrow Nile Valley, became home to several rising centers of power. Among the most important were Hierakonpolis, Narkada, and Abydos. Each competed for influence. Each cultivated its own traditions, and each produced leaders determined to expand their authority. Meanwhile, Lower Egypt spread across the broad Nile Delta, where waterways branched toward the Mediterranean Sea. The delta supported its own communities, cultures, and regional rulers, connected to trade networks reaching the Near East. For centuries, these northern and southern regions developed along different paths. They were neighbors, sometimes partners, sometimes rivals. No one yet ruled them all. Archaeologists call this era the predynastic period. It is one of the least understood chapters of Egyptian history because writing had only begun to emerge. Instead of long historical records, researchers rely on pottery, burial sites, carved palettes, ivory labels, and tiny seal impressions. Every artifact becomes a clue. A broken jar can reveal where goods were traded. A burial can reveal differences in wealth and social status. A carved symbol may preserve the earliest hint of a ruler's identity. It is history reconstructed from fragments. Among these fragments, one innovation quietly changed everything. Symbols became communication. At first, they marked ownership. Then they identified places. Eventually, they represented individuals. These early signs were not yet the fully developed hieroglyphic writing that would later decorate temples and tombs, but they marked the beginning of a remarkable transformation. Ideas could now survive beyond a single lifetime. A ruler's authority could be recorded. Goods could be counted. Names could endure. This simple breakthrough would become one of the foundations of Egyptian civilization. As regional kingdoms expanded, their rulers searched for new ways to express power. Ceremonial objects displayed scenes of victory. Elite tombs grew larger and more elaborate. Royal symbols became increasingly standardized. Among them was a remarkable design known today as the Serek, a rectangular palace facade topped by the falcon god Horus. Within this frame appeared the ruler's name. It was far more than decoration. It proclaimed legitimacy. It announced that a leader ruled not merely through force, but through sacred authority. The Serek would become one of the defining symbols of Egyptian kingship, and soon it would preserve the names of rulers almost forgotten by time. Somewhere during this age of growing kingdoms, changing symbols, and expanding ambition, figures emerged whose identities remain tantalizingly elusive. One left traces in the royal cemetery at Abydos. Another may have extended his influence farther along the Nile than any ruler before him. and one survives only through a mysterious crocodile symbol that continues to divide scholars. Their names are faint, their stories incomplete. Yet together, they stand at the threshold between prehistory and history, before the pyramids, before the dynasties, before Egypt became Egypt. The first kings were already walking the banks of the Nile. Their footsteps have long vanished beneath the desert sands, but the clues they left behind are waiting. And in the next chapter, we descend into the royal cemetery of Abydos to meet a ruler whose name may be the earliest ever recorded in Egyptian history. Chapter 2. The Birth of Kingship. When chiefs became kings, the first king of Egypt did not appear overnight. There was no single day when a village chief awoke as a pharaoh. No ceremony announced the birth of one of history's greatest institutions. Instead, the idea of kingship emerged slowly, shaped by generations of conflict, cooperation, belief, and survival. To understand these forgotten rulers, we must first understand the world that created them. 5,000 years before the rise of the pyramids, the Nile Valley was divided among dozens of small communities. Each settlement relied on the river, each defended its fields, and each honored its own sacred traditions. Their leaders were more than warriors. They settled disputes, organized irrigation, directed harvests, protected trade caravans, led religious ceremonies. And when danger threatened, they stood at the front of their people. In these early societies, there was no clear line between political authority and spiritual responsibility. A successful harvest was believed to depend upon harmony between humanity and the divine. When the Nile flooded at the right time, it was a blessing. When crops failed, many believed the balance between people, nature, and the gods had been disturbed. The community looked to its leader not only for protection, but for order. This idea would later become one of the most important principles in Egyptian civilization. The Egyptians called it Ma'at, the concept of truth, balance, justice, and cosmic order. Although the word itself belongs to a later period, its roots may lie in these early communities, where maintaining harmony meant the difference between life and death. But leadership alone was not enough. A ruler needed legitimacy. He needed people to believe that his authority came from something greater than strength alone. Across Upper Egypt, powerful symbols began to appear. The falcon soared high above the cliffs, watching everything below. Its sharp vision and dominance of the skies made it a natural emblem of authority. Over time, the falcon became closely associated with Horus, the deity who would later stand as the divine protector of Egyptian kings. The mighty bull represented power, fertility, and endurance. The lion symbolized courage. The jackal, often seen near cemeteries, became connected with death and protection. And along the Nile's marshes lurked one of the river's most feared creatures, the crocodile, silent beneath the water, patient beyond measure, capable of explosive violence. To ancient communities, such animals were not simply wildlife. They embodied sacred forces. Many scholars believe early rulers adopted these powerful creatures as symbols of their authority, linking themselves to the strength and mystery of the natural world. This was an age when the boundary between man and symbol was remarkably thin. A leader might not simply carry the image of a falcon. He might be understood as ruling under its protection, or even embodying its power. That helps explain why some of Egypt's earliest rulers are known today by names or emblems connected to animals. The famous Scorpion King, known from ceremonial artifacts, is one example. While his exact place in history remains debated, the evidence suggests he was a real pre-dynastic ruler rather than merely a legendary figure. Another enigmatic figure is remembered only through a crocodile symbol found on ancient seal impressions. Was crocodile the ruler's personal name, a royal title, the emblem of a powerful family, or perhaps the symbol of an administrative office or religious institution? No one knows for certain. The uncertainty reminds us that archaeology often provides possibilities rather than final answers. As settlements expanded into regional kingdoms, competition intensified. Control of fertile land meant survival. Control of trade meant wealth. Control of the Nile meant power. Chiefs who successfully defended their people gained prestige. Victorious leaders absorbed neighboring communities. Alliances were forged through diplomacy and marriage. Others were won through warfare. Archaeologists have uncovered ceremonial mace heads, finely crafted knives, and decorated palettes depicting scenes of conquest. Although many of these objects carried symbolic meaning, they reveal a society where military success increasingly reinforced political authority. Power was becoming organized. For the first time, rulers needed officials to manage supplies. Storehouses collected grain after each harvest. Craftsmen produced goods for elite households. Trade expeditions required planning and record-keeping. Simple marks scratched onto pottery evolved into recognizable symbols. These markings helped identify goods, places, and eventually, rulers themselves. Out of these practical needs, writing slowly began to emerge. It was not literature, not history, not poetry. It was administration, counting, ownership, identity. Yet, those humble beginnings would eventually produce one of humanity's most sophisticated writing systems. As administration became more complex, so too did kingship. A leader was no longer merely the strongest man in the village. He became the center of an expanding political system. His authority reached beyond his immediate family. His decisions affected multiple communities. His symbols traveled with merchants and officials. His name appeared on jars shipped hundreds of kilometers along the Nile. One innovation perfectly captured this transformation: the serek. At first glance, it appears to be a simple rectangle, but its design represents the facade of a royal palace. Above it stands the falcon of Horus. Inside the rectangle appears the ruler's name. The serek declared something extraordinary. This individual ruled from a royal residence under the protection of Horus. It was one of the earliest visual statements of Egyptian kingship. Centuries before the pyramids, this symbol announced that political authority and divine legitimacy had become inseparable. Many of the names preserved within these early sereks survive nowhere else. Without them, rulers such as Ka might have disappeared completely from history. As archaeologists uncovered these ancient inscriptions at Abydos, Hierakonpolis, and other sites, they realized they were looking at something unexpected. Egypt's royal tradition did not begin with Narmer. It reached back into an older, darker age, populated by rulers who had almost vanished from memory. Some names were clear, others were damaged. A few remained impossible to interpret with confidence. Each discovery raised new questions. How many kings ruled before Narmer? How large were their kingdoms? Did they command thousands of people or only a handful of villages? And which of them first imagined that the lands along the Nile could become one kingdom? The answers remain buried beneath layers of sand and time. Yet among all these mysterious figures, one name appears again and again in the royal cemetery at Abydos, a name so ancient that some Egyptologists consider it the earliest identifiable royal name in Egyptian history. His tomb lay hidden for thousands of years. His story survived only because a few fragile inscriptions escaped destruction. In the next chapter, we descend into the sacred cemetery of el-Ka'ab to meet the man known as Iry-Hor, the shadow at Abydos, and perhaps the first ruler whose name still echoes across 5 millennia. Chapter 3. Discovery of Dynasty 0. Approximate runtime 10-12 minutes. For more than 2,000 years, the earliest kings of Egypt were invisible. Ancient Egyptian priests carefully recorded long lists of pharaohs. Greek historians such as Herodotus wrote about magnificent temples and legendary rulers. Modern explorers marveled at towering pyramids and colossal statues carved from stone. Yet nowhere did anyone speak of Iry-Hor. No one remembered Ka. And no ancient history mentioned the mysterious ruler archaeologists would later call Crocodile. It was as though the first chapter of Egyptian civilization had been torn from the book of history. For centuries, scholars believe the story of Egypt began with Narmer, the king traditionally credited with uniting Upper and Lower Egypt around 3100 BCE. Narmer's famous ceremonial palette appeared to show a victorious ruler wearing both the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt. To many historians, this was the birth of the Egyptian state, but history has a way of hiding its greatest secrets beneath the sand. During the 19th century, European interest in ancient Egypt grew rapidly. Following Napoleon Bonaparte's campaign in Egypt, travelers, artists, and archaeologists journeyed into the Nile Valley, hoping to uncover the civilization of the pharaohs. Most searched for spectacular monuments, golden treasures, royal mummies, great temples. Few imagined that the oldest discoveries would be the smallest. Far to the south, near the ancient city of Abydos, local people had long known of strange mounds rising from the desert floor. Wind-blown sand concealed broken mud brick walls and scattered fragments of pottery. At first glance, the landscape seemed unremarkable, yet beneath the surface lay one of the most important archaeological sites in the history of Egypt. The cemetery known today as el-Ka'ab. Its Arabic name means Mother of Pots, a reference to the enormous number of broken ceramic vessels scattered across the area. Pilgrims visiting the sacred site over thousands of years had left countless offerings, slowly covering the ancient burials beneath layers of pottery fragments. No one realized just how old these tombs truly were. In the late 19th century, French archaeologist Émile Amélinot began excavating the cemetery. His work uncovered remarkable tombs belonging to some of Egypt's earliest rulers. However, archaeology was still a young discipline, and excavation methods were often destructive by modern standards. Important evidence was sometimes overlooked. Fragile artifacts were damaged. Precise records were not always kept. Even so, Amelino's discoveries hinted that Egypt's history reached much farther into the past than scholars had imagined. Soon, another archaeologist arrived, Sir William Matthew Flinders Petrie. Unlike many excavators of his time, Petrie believed that every object mattered, no matter how small or ordinary it appeared. A broken jar, a tiny ivory tag, a fragment of clay bearing the impression of a seal. To Petrie, these were not scraps of rubbish. They were evidence. He carefully recorded where every artifact was found, allowing future generations to reconstruct ancient events with far greater accuracy. His meticulous methods transformed archaeology from treasure hunting into a scientific investigation. As excavations continued, unexpected patterns began to emerge. Some of the tombs were clearly older than those of Egypt's first dynasty. The architecture was simpler. The inscriptions looked more primitive, yet certain symbols appeared strikingly familiar. Again and again, archaeologists discovered the earliest form of the royal sirek, a rectangular design representing the facade of a royal palace. Above it stood the falcon of Horus. Inside appeared mysterious signs that seemed to represent the names of rulers. These were not random decorations. They were royal identities. Evidence that kings had ruled before the officially recognized First Dynasty. The implications were astonishing. If these rulers truly existed, then Narmer had not created kingship from nothing. He had inherited traditions already, centuries in the making. As the 20th century progressed, new excavations continued, revealing additional clues. Among the archaeologists who helped reshape our understanding was the German Egyptologist Günther Dreyer. Working at Abydos during the late 20th century, Dreyer and his team uncovered hundreds of inscribed objects from the pre-dynastic period. Tiny ivory labels, clay seal impressions, stone vessels, pottery bearing early inscriptions. Many carried symbols associated with rulers whose names had never appeared in traditional king lists. Some inscriptions could be linked to a ruler called Iry-Hor. Others belonged to Ka. Still others hinted at mysterious figures whose identities remain uncertain. Each discovery pushed Egypt's royal history farther back into time. One of the most remarkable finds was evidence suggesting that some of these rulers already maintained administrative systems. Goods were labeled. Taxes or offerings may have been recorded. Storage jars carried identifying marks. Trade reached distant regions including Canaan and Nubia. These discoveries revealed that government, commerce, and royal administration were developing long before Egypt officially became a unified kingdom. The evidence also transformed our understanding of writing. For generations, scholars believed hieroglyphic writing appeared suddenly during the First Dynasty. Instead, Abydos showed that writing evolved gradually. Simple symbols became labels. Labels became names. Names became royal identities. From these humble beginnings emerged one of humanity's greatest writing systems. Still, many mysteries remain unsolved. Not every archaeologist agrees on the interpretation of every inscription. Some symbols are damaged beyond recognition. Others may represent places rather than people. Even when a name appears clear, determining exactly who that ruler was can be remarkably difficult. Did he govern a single town, a regional kingdom, or nearly all of Upper Egypt? Archaeology rarely provides complete answers. Instead, it offers fragments waiting to be assembled. Like a puzzle with thousands of missing pieces, every excavation adds another small part to the picture. Occasionally, an entirely new discovery forces scholars to rethink decades of accepted history. That is why Dynasty Zero continues to fascinate researchers today. Unlike later periods filled with monuments and written records, these earliest kings survive only through delicate clues that can fit inside the palm of a hand. A broken seal, an ivory tag, a scratched symbol on a pottery jar. These humble objects have rewritten the opening chapter of Egyptian civilization. And among all the names emerging from the sands of Abydos, one stands above the others. A ruler whose identity was debated for decades. A king whose name may be the oldest ever recorded in Egypt. In the next chapter, we follow the faint trail left by pottery, tombs, and seal impressions to meet the enigmatic ruler known as Iry-Hor. Was he merely a powerful local chief? Or the very first king whose name has survived across 5,000 years of history? Chapter 4. Iry-Hor, the first name in Egypt. Approximate runtime, 12 minutes. Some names conquer history, others almost disappear. For thousands of years, no one knew the name Iry-Hor. It was never celebrated in temple inscriptions. It was never carved onto towering monuments. No ancient storyteller passed his deeds from one generation to the next. Instead, his memory survived in silence, hidden beneath the sands of Abydos, scratched onto pottery, impressed into clay, and preserved on fragile ivory labels no larger than the palm of a hand. If those tiny objects had not survived, Iry-Hor might have been forgotten forever. Today, many Egyptologists regard him as one of the earliest identifiable rulers in Egyptian history. Some even consider him the earliest named king currently known from archaeological evidence. Yet this conclusion was not reached easily. For decades, scholars argued over whether Iry-Hor had existed at all. The debate began with a handful of unusual symbols discovered inside the royal cemetery of el-Kab at Abydos. Unlike later pharaohs, whose names appeared inside well-formed serex beneath the falcon of Horus, these markings looked incomplete and unfamiliar. Some researchers believed they represented a place. Others thought they identified stored goods. A few suggested they were nothing more than decorative marks. There simply wasn't enough evidence to be certain. Then more discoveries began to emerge. Additional pottery fragments, seal impressions, ivory labels. Again and again, the same symbols appeared together. The pattern became increasingly difficult to dismiss. What had once seemed like isolated marks now looked like the repeated name of a single individual. Gradually, the scholarly consensus shifted. The mysterious signs were no longer viewed as random symbols. They belonged to a ruler. His name, reconstructed from the inscriptions, became known as Iry-Hor, Although the exact pronunciation remains uncertain, the evidence strongly suggests that a powerful leader bearing this name ruled in Upper Egypt sometime during the late pre-dynastic period, likely only a generation or two before Ka and Narmer. Yet who was Iry-Hor? That question remains one of archaeology's greatest mysteries. Imagine standing on the western desert, overlooking Abydos more than 5,000 years ago. Below, the Nile winds through a fertile ribbon of green. Fields of grain sway gently in the breeze. Boats glide along the river carrying pottery, grain, stone, timber, and livestock between growing settlements. Mud brick houses cluster around shrines dedicated to local gods. Smoke rises from cooking fires as craftsmen shape stone vessels and copper tools. This is not yet the Egypt of pyramids and monumental temples. It is a landscape of ambitious towns competing for influence. Among these settlements, Abydos occupies a position of growing importance. Located in Upper Egypt, it controls valuable trade routes, linking the Nile Valley with the eastern deserts and the lands farther south. Its rulers grow wealthy through agriculture, trade, and expanding political influence. Some historians believe Iry-Hor ruled from this region, perhaps from nearby Thinis, a city whose exact location has never been conclusively identified, but is thought to have served as an early royal center. If true, Iry-Hor was not merely a village chief. He may have governed one of the strongest kingdoms along the Nile. Archaeological evidence supports this possibility. His name has been found not only at Abydos, but also at sites farther north, suggesting that goods associated with his administration traveled considerable distances. Whether this reflects direct political control or extensive trade remains uncertain. Either interpretation points to a ruler whose influence extended beyond a single community. His tomb offers additional clues. Buried within the royal cemetery at el-Kab, the burial consists of twin chambers built from mud brick. Compared with later royal tombs, it appears modest. Yet within its simplicity lies enormous historical significance. The tomb belongs to a period before pyramids, before elaborate stone architecture, before grand funerary complexes. At the time, constructing a carefully planned mud brick burial represented considerable authority and resources. Nearby archaeologists uncovered hundreds of pottery vessels that once contained food, drink, oils, and offerings intended to sustain the ruler in the afterlife. Even in death, the king remained important. His burial reflects beliefs that would later shape Egyptian civilization for more than 3,000 years. Death was not an ending. It was a journey. A ruler required provisions, protection, ritual. These early customs would eventually evolve into the magnificent royal tombs of later dynasties. Perhaps the most fascinating evidence comes from the small inscriptions bearing Iry-Hor's name. Some appear alongside symbols interpreted as royal property or administrative centers. Others are written on storage jars that may have transported wine, oil, or grain. These humble objects reveal something remarkable. Someone was organizing production, recording ownership, managing supplies. Administration was already becoming sophisticated. The machinery of kingship had begun to turn, yet uncertainty remains. Did Iry-Hor rule all of Upper Egypt, or only the Abydos region? Did neighboring rulers recognize his authority? Or was he simply the strongest among several competing chiefs? The evidence cannot answer these questions with certainty. What archaeology reveals is possibility rather than certainty. Some scholars have even suggested that Iry-Hor may have conducted military expeditions into the Nile Delta based on inscriptions found far from Abydos. If correct, this could represent one of the earliest attempts to extend southern influence northward, a process that would eventually culminate in the unification of Egypt. But caution is essential. Trade can spread artifacts just as easily as conquest. A jar bearing a king's mark does not automatically prove political control. It may simply show that merchants carried goods across great distances. This is why archaeologists weigh every discovery carefully. Each new artifact must be examined within its wider context. Perhaps the greatest achievement of Iry-Hor was not military conquest. Perhaps it was demonstrating that leadership could extend beyond a single village. That administration could connect multiple communities, that a ruler's identity could be preserved through written symbols. In these quiet innovations, we glimpse the earliest foundations of the Egyptian state. Long before colossal temples proclaimed the glory of kings, Iry-Hor's authority lived in simple marks, scratched onto clay. They were small, almost invisible, yet they changed history. Without these early experiments in administration, royal identity, and political organization, later, pharaohs might never have ruled a united Egypt. Still, Iry-Hor's reign was only the beginning. Another ruler would soon emerge from Abydos with greater authority, a larger royal tomb, and stronger evidence of expanding power. His name was simple, just one syllable, Ka. Many Egyptologists believe he stood at the threshold of unification, leading Egypt one step closer to becoming the world's first great territorial kingdom. In the next chapter, we meet the king who came before Narmer, the mysterious ruler known simply as Ka. Chapter 5. Life during Iry-Hor's time. Approximate runtime, 12 minutes. History often remembers kings, but to understand a king, we must first understand the people he ruled. When we hear the name Iry-Hor, it is easy to imagine a powerful ruler standing above his subjects, commanding armies and issuing royal decrees. Yet, his kingdom was not the Egypt of pyramids and towering temples. It was a young civilization still finding its identity, a land where every harvest mattered, every flood determined survival, and every sunrise brought new uncertainty. Let us step back more than 5,000 years. The first rays of dawn spread across the Nile Valley. Morning mist rises gently from the river, while birds call from dense papyrus marshes. Fishermen push reed boats into calm waters before the day's heat arrives. Farmers shoulder wooden hoes and walk toward fields still damp from the annual inundation. The Nile has once again kept its promise. When the flood waters recede, they leave behind a blanket of rich black silt. It is this fertile soil that allows life to flourish in a landscape surrounded by desert. To the people of Upper Egypt, the river is far more than water. It is life itself. Without it, their villages would disappear within a single generation. Most families live in modest homes built from sun-dried mud brick. The walls are thick enough to keep the interior cool during the scorching afternoons and warm during surprisingly cold desert nights. Roofs are constructed from wooden beams covered with reeds, branches, and packed mud. Inside, the furnishings are simple. Reed mats cover the floor. Clay jars store grain and water. Basketry hangs from the walls. Stone grinding tools sit beside hearths where bread is baked each morning. The smell of fresh bread fills the village as women grind emmer wheat into flour using heavy stone querns, a task repeated countless times throughout the day. Bread is the foundation of every meal. Alongside it are onions, garlic, lentils, dates, figs, and fish caught from the Nile. Those living near marshes hunt ducks and geese with nets or throwing sticks. Occasionally, meat from cattle, sheep, or goats is prepared for festivals and important ceremonies, though for most people it remains an uncommon luxury. Beer accompanies nearly every meal. Unlike modern beer, it is thick, nutritious, and made from fermented grain. It provides valuable calories and is often safer to drink than untreated water. Children help care for livestock from an early age. They gather reeds, fetch water, scare birds away from growing crops, and learn the skills needed to survive. Life is demanding, but each member of the community has an important role. As villages grow larger, work becomes increasingly specialized. Some people devote themselves entirely to making pottery. Others shape elegant stone vessels from hard rock using astonishing patience. Copper workers experiment with new tools and ornaments, while skilled carpenters construct boats capable of traveling hundreds of kilometers along the Nile. Ivory carvers produce delicate combs, ceremonial objects, and labels for elite households. These craftsmen are laying the foundations for one of the greatest artistic traditions in history. Trade connects these communities to lands far beyond the horizon. Boats sail north, carrying grain, pottery, and linen. They return with cedar wood from the Levant, valuable oils, shells, and exotic goods. To the south, traders journey toward Nubia in search of gold, ivory, incense, animal skins, and rare stones. Obsidian, prized for its razor-sharp edge, travels from distant volcanic regions through long networks of exchange. Every successful trade expedition strengthens the authority of local rulers like Iry-Hor. Controlling commerce means controlling wealth, and wealth attracts followers. Religion touches every aspect of daily life. There are no enormous temples yet. Instead, sacred places are often simple shrines made from wood, reeds, and mud brick. Offerings of food, beer, flowers, and incense are presented to local deities believed to protect the community. The natural world itself is sacred. The soaring falcon inspires awe. The powerful bull represents strength and fertility. The mysterious crocodile commands both fear and respect. People believe unseen forces inhabit the river, the desert, and the sky. Maintaining harmony with those forces is essential. The village leader is expected to safeguard not only the people but also their relationship with the divine. In this way, political authority and religious responsibility become inseparable. Death, too, holds profound meaning. The people of Iry-Hor's kingdom do not see death as the end of existence. Bodies are carefully buried in shallow graves along the desert's edge, where dry sand naturally preserves them. Loved ones are accompanied by pottery filled with food, beer, tools, jewelry, and personal belongings. These offerings reveal a remarkable belief. Life continues beyond death. The deceased will need nourishment, protection, and possessions in another world. For rulers, these beliefs become even more elaborate. Royal tombs receive larger quantities of goods, fine pottery, stone vessels, imported materials, ceremonial objects. The community invests enormous effort in honoring its leader because they believe his journey into the afterlife remains important for the living as well. Archaeologists have discovered that even during Iry-Hor's time, elite burials display increasing differences in wealth and complexity. Some tombs contain only a few simple vessels. Others are filled with hundreds of carefully arranged objects. These contrasts reveal a society becoming more organized and more unequal. A distinct ruling class is emerging. Its members command labor, control resources, and oversee expanding territories. Yet this growing prosperity brings new dangers. Competition between neighboring kingdoms intensifies. Control of fertile farmland becomes increasingly valuable. Trade routes must be protected. River crossings become strategic assets. Conflict is no longer a rare event. Weapons found in pre-dynastic burials include finely crafted flint knives, maces, clubs, bows, arrows, and copper blades. Some are practical, others are ceremonial, symbols of authority carried by powerful leaders. A ruler such as Iry-Hor must be more than an administrator. He must also be a diplomat, a judge, a military commander, and a religious leader. His success determines whether his people flourish or struggle. Perhaps this is why his name endured while so many others vanished. Not because he built monuments, but because he helped shape a new idea of leadership, an authority extending beyond family ties, beyond individual villages, toward something larger, toward a kingdom. As archaeologists piece together pottery fragments, tombs, and seal impressions, they begin to see that Iry-Hor's world was already changing rapidly. The scattered settlements of earlier generations are becoming connected through administration, commerce, religion, and royal power. The dream of a united Nile Valley is still incomplete, but it no longer seems impossible. Somewhere beyond the horizon, another ruler is preparing to build upon these foundations. His tomb will be larger, his symbols more refined, his authority perhaps greater than any ruler before him. His name is astonishingly simple, Ka, and with him, Egypt moves one decisive step closer to becoming the civilization that history will never forget. Chapter 6. The King before Narmer. Approximate runtime, 12 minutes. History often celebrates the rulers who finish great achievements. It remembers the conqueror who wins the final battle, the explorer who reaches the destination, the king who places the crown upon his head. But history often forgets those who prepared the way. Long before Narmer united Egypt, another ruler stood at the edge of that transformation. His name was Ka. It is one of the shortest royal names in Egyptian history. Just a single word. Yet behind that simple name lies one of the most important chapters in the birth of Egyptian civilization. Unlike Iry-Hor, whose identity was debated for decades, Ka is accepted by most Egyptologists as a genuine pre-dynastic ruler. His existence is supported by multiple archaeological discoveries, including royal inscriptions, seal impressions, and an impressive tomb at Abydos. Even so, many mysteries remain. We know his name, we know where he was buried, but we know almost nothing about the man himself. Imagine Upper Egypt around 3200 BCE. The Nile Valley has changed dramatically over the past generations. Villages have become towns. Towns have grown into powerful regional kingdoms. Trade stretches farther than ever before. Craftsmen produce finer pottery. Copper tools are becoming increasingly common. Early writing appears more frequently on jars, ivory tags, and administrative seals. Power is becoming organized, and at the center of one of the strongest kingdoms stands Ka. His royal cemetery lies at el-Ka'ab, the sacred burial ground near Abydos that would later become the resting place of Egypt's earliest kings. Compared with the tomb of Iry-Hor, Ka's burial is noticeably larger and more sophisticated. Its multiple chambers suggest careful planning rather than simple construction. Storage rooms held food, drink, oils, tools, and ceremonial objects intended to accompany the ruler into the afterlife. Such a project required skilled laborers, experienced builders, and careful administration. This was no ordinary village chief. The tomb itself reflects a kingdom becoming more centralized. Perhaps even more revealing than the tomb is Ka's royal seric. Unlike earlier inscriptions, Ka's name appears clearly inside the palace facade that symbolizes royal authority, with the falcon of Horus displayed above. The imagery carries a powerful message. The ruler is no longer simply a local leader. He governs under the divine protection of Horus. Kingship is becoming sacred. The relationship between ruler and god is growing stronger. This symbolism would remain at the heart of Egyptian monarchy for the next 3,000 years. Archaeologists have found Ka's inscriptions not only at Abydos, but also at several sites farther north, including the Nile Delta. These discoveries have sparked one of the most fascinating debates in Egyptian history. Did Ka already control parts of Lower Egypt? Or were these objects carried north through trade? Both possibilities remain open. If Ka exercised political authority over both Upper and parts of Lower Egypt, then the process of unification may have begun before Narmer's reign. If the inscriptions reflect commerce instead, they still reveal a remarkably extensive trading network under Ka's administration. Either interpretation points to a ruler whose influence reached well beyond his home territory. Trade was transforming the ancient world. Boats traveled along the Nile carrying grain, beer, pottery, copper tools, stone vessels, and luxury goods. Caravans crossed harsh deserts in search of minerals and precious stones. Merchants journeyed into Nubia for gold and ivory, while contacts with the Levant brought cedar, wood, oils, wine, and exotic materials. Managing this expanding economy required organization. Someone had to supervise storehouses, collect offerings, distribute supplies, record shipments. This growing bureaucracy is visible in the many seal impressions and labels discovered from Ka's reign. These humble administrative objects reveal a kingdom becoming increasingly sophisticated. Writing, though still in its infancy, had become an essential tool of government. Simple symbols identified estates, goods, officials, and royal property. Every inscription represented another step toward the fully developed hieroglyphic writing that would later fill Egypt's temples and tombs. Ka's reign also appears to mark an important stage in the evolution of royal ceremony. Although no detailed descriptions survive, the increasing complexity of elite burials suggests that kingship was becoming surrounded by ritual. The ruler was no longer simply the strongest warrior. He became the symbolic center of the kingdom. His authority extended into religion, justice, trade, agriculture, and diplomacy. He embodied stability. For ordinary people, this stability meant survival. When irrigation systems functioned properly, crops flourished. When trade remained secure, villages prospered. When disputes were settled peacefully, communities grew. The king's success affected every family living along the Nile. Yet maintaining that stability was never easy. Upper Egypt remained divided among ambitious regional powers. Competition for fertile land, trade routes, and political influence continued. Military conflict was almost certainly a recurring reality. Ceremonial weapons discovered in elite burials remind us that leadership often depended upon strength as much as diplomacy. Whether Ka expanded his kingdom through conquest, alliances, marriage, or economic influence remains uncertain. The archaeological record simply does not preserve enough information to tell the full story. This uncertainty has led historians to ask one of the most intriguing questions in early Egyptian history. Who exactly was Ka in relation to Narmer? Some scholars suggest Ka may have been Narmer's immediate predecessor. Others have proposed that he could have been a close relative, perhaps even Narmer's father, though there is no direct evidence proving such a relationship. Still others argue that Ka belonged to a separate branch of the royal family, whose achievements were later absorbed into Narmer's legacy. For now, the truth remains hidden. What we do know is that Narmer inherited a world already transformed by rulers like Ka. The institutions of kingship already existed. Royal symbols had been established. Administration had become increasingly organized. Trade connected distant regions. Writing was evolving rapidly. The foundations of the Egyptian state had already been laid. Narmer would build upon them. He would not build them alone. Perhaps that is Ka's greatest legacy. He ruled during a turning point in history, an age when scattered kingdoms were beginning to think of themselves as something larger, an age when the dream of a united Nile Valley no longer seemed impossible. His name survives inside a simple serek carved onto pottery more than 5,000 years ago, a fragile symbol, easy to overlook. Yet within that modest inscription lies the story of a king standing on the threshold of one of humanity's greatest civilizations. But even Ka is not the most mysterious ruler of Dynasty Zero. Beyond the royal cemetery of Abydos, archaeologists have uncovered seal impressions bearing an image unlike any other. Not a falcon, not a bull, but a crocodile. Was it the name of a forgotten king, a royal emblem, or the symbol of a powerful cult whose meaning has been lost forever? In the next chapter, we enter the darkest mystery of Egypt's earliest history, the legend of the ruler known only as Crocodile. Chapter 7. Ka's Lost kingdom. Every kingdom leaves behind a signature. Some leave towering walls. Others leave magnificent temples. The kingdom of Ka left something far more subtle. Fragments, broken pottery, ivory labels, clay seal impressions. From these scattered pieces, archaeologists have attempted to reconstruct a kingdom that vanished more than 5,000 years ago. It is like rebuilding an entire city from a handful of bricks. And yet, little by little, a picture begins to emerge. By the time Ka ruled Upper Egypt, the Nile Valley had changed dramatically. The scattered farming villages of earlier generations had evolved into thriving towns connected by trade, administration, and shared religious traditions. Population had grown. Agriculture had become more efficient. Craftsmanship reached new levels of sophistication. Power was becoming concentrated in the hands of a small royal elite. Ka ruled during a period of remarkable transformation. His kingdom may not yet have been the unified Egypt of later centuries, but it was already far more organized than the communities ruled by his predecessors. At the heart of his kingdom stood the Nile. Every year, the river flooded its banks, spreading rich black silt across the valley. The flood determined everything: planting seasons, harvests, food supplies, even political stability. A weak flood could mean hunger. A strong flood could bring prosperity. Managing these precious resources required careful planning. Grain had to be stored. Fields had to be measured. Labor had to be organized. These responsibilities likely fell upon officials serving the king. Although we know little about these administrators, seal impressions and inscribed labels suggest that an early bureaucracy was already taking shape. This was the beginning of government, not merely ruling through personal strength, but through organized institutions capable of managing an expanding kingdom. Agriculture formed the foundation of Ka's wealth. Fields of barley and emmer wheat stretched across the fertile floodplain. Flax provided fibers for linen clothing. Date palms supplied fruit and shade. Large herds of cattle grazed on fresh vegetation after the floodwaters receded. In ancient Egypt, cattle represented far more than food. They symbolized wealth itself. Owning large herds demonstrated power, prosperity, and influence. Royal officials probably counted livestock, recorded harvests, and collected portions of agricultural production as offerings or taxes. These resources supported craftsmen, builders, soldiers, and religious ceremonies throughout the kingdom. Trade expanded alongside agriculture. The Nile functioned as Egypt's greatest highway. Boats carried goods in both directions, connecting distant settlements with remarkable efficiency. Stone vessels crafted in Upper Egypt traveled hundreds of kilometers. Fine pottery reached communities far beyond its place of manufacture. Copper tools became increasingly common, replacing older stone implements in many specialized tasks. Beyond Egypt's borders, merchants sought valuable resources unavailable within the Nile Valley. From Nubia came gold, ivory, ebony, incense, and exotic animal skins. From the Sinai Peninsula came copper and turquoise. Contacts with the Levant brought cedar, wood, wine, oils, and luxury goods prized by the royal court. These long-distance exchanges required planning, diplomacy, and protection. Every successful expedition increased the prestige of the king. Control over trade meant control over wealth, and wealth strengthened royal authority. The kingdom also became a center of remarkable craftsmanship. Potters produced elegant, red-polished vessels with blackened rims, a distinctive style admired throughout the region. Stoneworkers shaped exceptionally hard rocks into graceful bowls and ceremonial containers using techniques that demanded extraordinary patience. Goldsmiths fashioned beads and ornaments from precious metals. Ivory carvers created delicate combs, gaming pieces, and decorative objects. Many of these luxury goods were reserved for the royal family and high-ranking officials. Art itself became a language of power. The finest objects reflected not only beauty, but also political authority. Religion continued to shape every aspect of life. Although the great temples of later Egypt had not yet been built, sacred rituals were becoming increasingly organized. Shrines honored local deities associated with fertility, the Nile, the sky, and powerful animals. The falcon remained closely connected with kingship. Its image appeared above the royal serek, reinforcing the belief that the ruler governed under divine protection. This growing association between kingship and Horus would become one of the defining features of Egyptian civilization. The king was no longer viewed merely as a political leader. He became the earthly representative of divine order. Perhaps the greatest challenge facing Ka was maintaining unity among increasingly powerful regional communities. Every prosperous town possessed ambitious leaders. Every fertile district represented valuable territory. Negotiating alliances, resolving disputes, and responding to conflicts required constant attention. Military strength undoubtedly played an important role. Excavations from this period have uncovered ceremonial mace heads, flint knives, copper weapons, and fortified settlements. These discoveries suggest that warfare remained an ever-present possibility. Whether Ka expanded his authority through diplomacy or conquest remains unknown. Perhaps he used both. History rarely offers simple answers. One intriguing clue comes from the distribution of Ka's inscriptions. Objects bearing his name have been discovered well beyond Abydos. Some appear in the Nile Delta, hundreds of kilometers to the north. To some scholars, this suggests that Ka's influence extended far beyond Upper Egypt. Others caution that trade alone can explain the movement of these artifacts. Merchants often carried royal goods across great distances without implying political control. Both interpretations remain possible. This uncertainty reminds us of the limits of archaeology. Unlike later pharaohs, Ka left no written chronicles describing military campaigns or diplomatic achievements. No victory inscriptions survive. No royal autobiography tells us how he viewed his reign. Instead, we must listen to quieter voices. A seal, a pottery jar, a burial chamber. Together, they speak of a ruler overseeing a kingdom growing steadily in complexity. Perhaps Ka's greatest accomplishment was not conquering territory, but strengthening the institutions that made larger kingdoms possible. Administration, trade, religious legitimacy, economic organization. These invisible achievements rarely capture popular imagination. Yet, they often shape history more profoundly than battles. By the end of Ka's reign, Egypt stood on the threshold of a remarkable transformation. The symbols of kingship had matured. Royal administration had expanded. Trade connected distant lands. Writing continued to evolve. The dream of political unity was closer than ever before. Only one final step remained. Yet even as Ka's kingdom approached that historic moment, another enigmatic figure appears in the archaeological record, a ruler whose very identity remains uncertain. Unlike Ka or Iry-Hor, his name is not clearly written in a royal seric. Instead, it appears beside one of the Nile's most feared creatures, the crocodile. Was this truly the name of a forgotten king? Or have modern archaeologists misunderstood the evidence left behind? The answer lies hidden among a handful of ancient seal impressions, fragments that continue to challenge everything we think we know about Egypt before the pharaohs. In the next chapter, we investigate one of the greatest mysteries of Dynasty 0, the ruler known simply as Crocodile. Chapter 8, Crocodile, the king who might not exist. Imagine trying to identify a king without a crown, without a palace, without a tomb that can be confidently assigned to him, without even knowing if his name was truly a name. That is the mystery of the ruler modern Egyptologists call Crocodile. Among all the shadowy figures of Dynasty 0, none is more elusive. Unlike Iry-Hor, whose inscriptions have been found repeatedly at Abydos, or Ka, whose royal tomb and seric leave little doubt that he ruled before Narmer, Crocodile exists only through a handful of enigmatic seal impressions discovered in Upper Egypt. These tiny pieces of clay have sparked decades of debate. They ask a question that archaeology cannot yet answer. Was there really a king called Crocodile? Or are we chasing the shadow of a symbol whose true meaning has been lost forever? The story begins not in a palace, but in fragments. During excavations at sites connected to Egypt's earliest rulers, archaeologists uncovered several seal impressions dating to the late predynastic period. Among the markings was the unmistakable image of a crocodile. Beside it appeared additional symbols, lines resembling flowing water, rope-like signs, and other early hieroglyphic elements whose meanings remain uncertain. To modern eyes, they appear simple. To archaeologists, they are incredibly important. Every line may represent a word. Every symbol may identify a place, or perhaps a ruler. Some Egyptologists believe these impressions preserve the name or emblem of a local king who ruled shortly before Egypt's unification. Because his identity cannot be read with certainty, scholars simply refer to him as Crocodile. It is a convenient modern label, not a confirmed ancient name. Other researchers disagree. They argue that the crocodile image may identify an estate, a temple, a government office, or even a religious cult connected with the dangerous reptile. Without additional inscriptions, certainty remains impossible. And that uncertainty is precisely what makes this figure so fascinating. To understand why the crocodile appears so prominently, we must understand its place in the ancient Egyptian imagination. The Nile was generous, but it could also be terrifying. Hidden beneath its calm surface waited one of Africa's most powerful predators, the Nile crocodile. Some grew more than 5 meters in length. Silent beneath the water, they watched patiently. A single sudden movement was enough to drag even large animals beneath the surface. To ancient communities living beside the river, the crocodile represented nature at its most unpredictable. It inspired fear, respect, and, eventually, reverence. Long before the god Sobek became one of Egypt's major deities, crocodiles were already powerful symbols. They embodied strength, patience, ferocity, mastery of the river itself. For a ruler seeking to demonstrate authority, few symbols could have been more intimidating. Imagine approaching a settlement ruled by a leader whose emblem was the crocodile. The message would have been unmistakable. This kingdom was dangerous. Its ruler was powerful. Its enemies should proceed with caution. Perhaps that is exactly what the mysterious seal intended to communicate. Or perhaps not. The evidence refuses to give us a simple answer. Unlike Ka and later kings, no securely identified royal tomb can be assigned to Crocodile. No large cemetery reveals his burial. No ceremonial macehead celebrates his victories. No surviving inscriptions describe battles, ceremonies, or royal achievements. Only a few impressions remain. Enough to suggest, not enough to prove. Some scholars have proposed that Crocodile ruled a small kingdom somewhere between Hierakonpolis and Nakada. Others believe his authority may have extended along sections of the Nile where crocodiles were especially numerous. A few researchers suggest he may have governed only briefly, before disappearing during the struggles that eventually produced a united Egypt. These ideas are plausible, but none can yet be demonstrated. There is another possibility. Perhaps Crocodile was never a personal ruler at all. Ancient administrations often used symbols to identify estates, workshops, temples, or government storehouses. If so, the crocodile image could represent an institution rather than an individual. Modern archaeologists, searching for missing kings, may have interpreted an administrative symbol as the name of a forgotten monarch. This debate reminds us of an essential truth. Archaeology is not simply about discovering objects. It is about interpreting them. Two experts can examine the same seal impression and reach different conclusions. Both may rely on careful scholarship. Both may acknowledge the limits of the evidence, and both may still disagree. Such disagreements are not signs of failure. They are signs that history remains alive. Every excavation has the potential to settle old debates or create entirely new ones. Imagine if tomorrow archaeologists uncovered another tomb beneath the sands of Abydos. Inside were dozens of seal impressions repeating the crocodile symbol alongside a clearly readable royal name. The mystery would change overnight. Or perhaps the opposite could happen. New discoveries might prove the crocodile represented a temple, an official, or a sacred district rather than a king. Either outcome would reshape our understanding of Egypt's earliest history. This is why Dynasty Zero remains one of archaeology's most exciting frontiers. Unlike later dynasties, where kings left monuments and written records, these early rulers survived through clues so fragile that a single artifact can transform an entire historical narrative. Yet, regardless of whether Crocodile was a king, a chief, or simply a powerful symbol, the seal impressions reveal something profound about this forgotten age. Human authority and animal power had become deeply intertwined. The falcon represented divine kingship. The bull symbolized strength. The scorpion embodied deadly authority, and the crocodile stood as a reminder that true power often inspired both loyalty and fear. These were not merely decorations, they were the language of leadership. As Egypt moved steadily toward political unity, rulers increasingly adopted symbols that projected authority across growing territories. The age of village chiefs was ending. The age of kings had begun. Soon, one ruler would accomplish what generations before him had only imagined. He would unite Upper and Lower Egypt beneath a single crown. History would remember his name, Narmer, but in celebrating the founder of dynastic Egypt, later generations almost forgot those who made his achievement possible. Iry-Hor, Ka, and the mysterious figure known only as Crocodile. Whether man or symbol, his story reminds us that history is rarely complete. Sometimes the greatest mysteries are preserved not in magnificent monuments, but in a thumb-sized piece of clay buried beneath 5,000 years of sand. In the next chapter, we step back from individual rulers to explore a deeper question. Why did the earliest kings choose animals to represent themselves? And what do those symbols reveal about the birth of divine kingship in ancient Egypt? As we close this chapter, we are reminded that the story of the mysterious crocodile ruler is still unfolding. Unlike later pharaohs, whose lives are recorded in inscriptions and monuments, the evidence for crocodile consists of only a few fragmentary seal impressions. Because of this, Egyptologists continue to debate whether the crocodile symbol represents an actual king, a local ruler, a royal estate, or an administrative or religious emblem. That uncertainty is not a weakness, it is the very essence of archaeology. Every new excavation, every pottery shard, every seal impression, and every forgotten tomb has the potential to reshape our understanding of Egypt's earliest history. In this documentary, we have followed the interpretations most widely discussed by scholars, while clearly distinguishing established archaeological evidence from informed hypotheses. Where the evidence is incomplete, we embrace the mystery rather than claim certainty. The forgotten rulers of Dynasty Zero remind us that history is not a finished story carved in stone. It is a living investigation, written one discovery at a time. Perhaps, somewhere beneath the sands of Abydos, or along an undiscovered stretch of the Nile, another inscription still waits to be found, one that may finally reveal who Crocodile really was. Until that day comes, the earliest kings of Egypt remain half hidden in the shadows, standing at the boundary between myth and history, inviting us to keep searching,